I'm Hayley Victoria and welcome back to my crime and policing channel. In today's video, we are looking at something that has really sparked my curiosity. And I know normally I do policing videos, but I'm throwing it back to when I first started creating content for YouTube, and I'm looking at crime scene investigation and forensic type investigations. That's because when I first started creating videos, I was teaching forensic science and crime scene investigation. Now I'm teaching policing more and criminology, that I start to maybe do more content on that because that's what I'm teaching and I'm just spreading the love. However, this one thing got my cogs turning, and I think there's something proper fishy about this, and I know I've got that investigative mindset anyway and I'm suspicious. However, I'm hoping that if any internet sleuths watching this, you can help me solve this because I've got an idea. I want us to catch a serial killer because I think we've got one. But let me know what you think, maybe even two actually. Let me know what you think, do some digging, let's crack this together. So, what we're talking about is the Hotel Cecil, or Cecil, as it's pronounced in America. Tomato, we pronounce things differently. So the Hotel Cecil, built in 1924, designed to be this beautiful, like, business person's middle class hotel, opulent interior. I'll put a picture up, proper nice, a bit Great Gatsby-esque, right? It looks gorgeous. However, due to the Great Depression landing not long after it was built, all that money, it didn't work out like that. So the ideas they had for the Hotel Cecil, that's not how it worked out. So the Great Depression hit, like I said, and the area where it was in downtown Los Angeles, known as Skid Row, I mean, it's called Skid Row, it's not going to be nice, is it? There were thousands of people jobless and homeless, drinking, eventually taking drugs and things. This was not a nice place to be. And as such, this hotel didn't attract the clientele in which they'd have liked it to. In fact, it became somewhat of a budget hotel, a rooming house of people who didn't have homes. The rent in there for permanent residency was like $400 a month. That's a right steal. I pay like more than that for my mortgage in rural Yorkshire. So yeah, it was it went from being this beautiful opulent place to being this rundown scary hotel. I almost stayed in a hotel a bit like this in Manchester. I'm not going to name it because I'll get sued, but it was horrendous. I booked it online because it looked pretty inside, like similar to the Cecil, had a lovely interior, like all this like art deco type stuff. However, it was gross. So when we went in there was like a man running about covered in blood. There was like a kebab just discarded next to a door. When we came back through town the next day, because obviously we stayed somewhere else, there was police cordons outside it because there was a body. I'm glad I didn't stay there because I might have been murdered, in my sleep. I'll take the financial hits, we never got refunded, to survive. Anyway, let's go back to the Hotel Cecil. Built in 1924, should have been nice, turned out not. But the most important thing about this hotel is that it is all over the media again. So thanks to Netflix, I'll put a link to the series that it is in the description. It's back in the public eye because it's proper weird. The big case that everyone's looking at is the mysterious death of Elisa Lam. It's being said in the coroner's report as accidental drowning. Not many people believe that. I'm not sure either, to be fair. Without evidence of that, it's a bit too fishy, but we'll get to that later. However, there's been a lot of reported cases of deaths, and of this woman who was on this documentary, she'd worked there 10 years and there were 80 deaths at least in the time she was there. What? That's not normal. It's not just, I'm just going to work. There's a 30% chance I'll find a body today. What? That's not normal for any hotel. So anyway, she was used to seeing lots of bodies. Notorious serial killers stayed in this hotel. Richard Ramirez was one of them, the famous Night Stalker in America. And when he was there, he'd just walk about in his pants covered in blood after murdering people, after chucking his clothes in his skips outside. No one batted an eyelid because that is what we're dealing with. One of the people who was a resident was on this documentary thing I was watching, and they said in the 80s and stuff when they lived there, it was so bad, and anything past the 7th floor and up, you wouldn't stay there because that is where bad stuff happened, where people would just get killed. People just get chucked out of windows and all sorts. Terrible, terrible times. So basically you just don't want to stay there. It's guff. It might be nice now. I think they've changed it now and put it into some lovely modern apartments, or at least trying to. But yeah, certainly in that time, it wasn't very nice. Anyway, let's get to it. Let's get to my theory, and I hope that some of you can help me out with this. So, there are a string of deaths, right? Suicides, suspicious deaths, a string of them, and they're in a particular time frame. And they stop for a bit, and they start again, and then they stop. And I've got theories about this, and I hope that it makes sense if you're watching this. So the first death we're looking at is W.K. Norton in 1931, and he reportedly died from ingesting poison. Now, if you watched my videos before on toxicology and things, poison it's a massive flag for me. Woo, big red flag. I know we had the Marsh test in the 1830s, which helped us to detect things like arsenic and stuff in people's stomach linings. However, conducting these tests, they were quite expensive. And they found some like poison capsules in this person's pocket, wrote it off as suicide. But I've not looked at the whole files, so I can't really say if that's the extent of the investigation. That's just how it looks on the surface. Really? No suicide note or anything. So that's the first one. Poison, 1931, W.K. Norton. The next one is September 1932. Benjamin Doddick, 25, single gunshot to the head. That's it. I don't think there was a note there. No note there either. So he got a single gunshot to the head. That's 2 suicides in a year, none of which sound to be particularly well investigated. But like I said, I'm just looking at the surface of the articles online. The next one is in 1934, Sergeant Louis D. Boardman, who slit his own throat. Apparently he didn't leave a note, and he wrote like something about his ill health or something, but he slit his own throat. It's another suicide. And remember, back in these days, the forensic examinations and stuff weren't as advanced as they are now. Now, some of these may be suicides, but some of them I don't think they are. And like I said, I think we might have got potential serial killer or killers on our hands. Who knows, they might have had like money or jewels or something that they've stolen. I don't know. Now, the next one is the first one of the fallings from buildings. So you'll see there's people who've been poisoned, people who fell from buildings. That's why I think maybe we've got 1 or 2 different serial killers happening at the same time. Anyway, so this first one is the first fall from the building. That's 1937, Grace E. Margot. She fell from the building from the 9th floor and got like tangled up in telephone wires, and she passed away, bless her. So that's the first fall from the building with an apparent suicide. Okay. Now we've got, as you know, poisoning, gunshot, throat slit, fall. There doesn't seem to be a pattern there in MO yet. Okay. Edwin C. Nebula died by ingesting poison in 1939. So we've got 2 poisons so far. 2 poisons, fall from a window, slit throat, gunshot. Okay. And like I said, some of these might very well be suicides. I don't think they all are. And poison's a weird one as well, because people don't really die by poison anymore. And dying by poison is proper horrible. It's super painful. Nobody would want that, okay? 1940, Dorothy Seagar, 45, died by poison. 3 poisons. 1 fall from a window, 1 gunshot, 1 slit throat. Now that happened in 1940, and then it stops. Oof. Okay, so we've got our poisons, fall, slit throat, gunshot, and it stopped in 1940. This is where my interest peaked. I was like, what was happening in 1940 around that time which might make something stop? World War II. That's what was happening. So my theory is whoever was potentially committing these crimes went to war. Well, the United States joined World War II in 1941. So I know the war started before that, but they joined in 1941. So my theory is, like I said, whoever's committing these crimes went off to join the war efforts. And that's why they stopped until 1947 when the war had finished. Right? And I'll show you or discuss what happened after that. There was another death in between that time which wasn't linked, or I can't link between them. And that was when Dorothy Jean Purcell gave birth to a baby and she didn't know she was pregnant. She gave birth to this baby in the bathroom, panicked, in some kind of confused and traumatized state, thinking the baby had died, and she threw it out the window. She was done for murder, but she was acquitted on mental health grounds, and thankfully didn't didn't do jail or life in prison or the death penalty for her crime. So that's the only one I cannot link to this pattern that I've got. Like I mentioned, in 1947 they started again, where Robert Smith, 35 years old, fell from the building from apparently one of the 7th floor windows. Now, like I said in the documentary, one of the residents there says anything after the 7th floor, you just don't go because it's horrific and scary. So we've got 3 poisons, 2 falls, a gunshot and a slit throat. Okay, it continues in this pattern. 1954, Helen Gurney fell from a window on the 7th floor. So we've got 3 poisons, I can't keep up, 3 falls, 4 falls? Right, so we're getting these patterns, aren't we? So throat slit, gunshot to the head, throwing the baby out don't seem to link for me. However, the rest of them do. 1962, Julia Frances Moore fell from a window. Right, so that's another fall from a window in the same amount of time. And there's no witnesses to these. She fell from a window. It just seems a little bit too close together and too unusual for it to be a coincidence to me anyway. And again, that's from the 8th floor. So those high floors again. I know that you want to be from a high window if you're going to jump off and hurt yourself anyway. But I mean, you could jump from a 2nd, 3rd floor window and that'd still happen. Another fall from a window shortly followed that. October 1962, so that's the same name, Pauline Otten, fell from her window. I think that was on the 9th floor. She had an argument with her husband, a partner, Dewey. He'd left, so he wasn't there. And apparently she jumped out a window to her death. Did she though? I know it sounds weird. You might think what you want about, but I think this is a massive coincidence. All these different people falling from windows, all these different people poisoned in this time period, because quite shortly afterwards it all stops. In 1964 there was a horrendous crime where hotel resident Pigeon Goldie Allsgood was brutally attacked, raped and stabbed and murdered. She was known for feeding the birds and stuff outside, and that was happening the daytime, which I'm not sure is linked or not, maybe opportunistic by a different person, because that room was ransacked. And if you look at different types of serial killers and things, if we're looking at a serial killer for the early crimes, look at someone who's very organised. Ransacking a room was very disorganised. So that leads me to think it's 2 different people, if in fact the first person is killing people and the people aren't just accidentally dying. Now, we haven't had a fall from the building for a long time, which, if we're looking back at my theories, could either mean that the person who's doing it is in prison, so they're away from that time, or maybe they've passed away. Testing my military theory, I had a look at when the US joined the Vietnam War, 1965, when all the deaths stopped. Also, they began again in 1975 when the war ended. Potential murder, we'll look at 1931. Let's say someone that works there, maybe 17, 18. People started working those days. And then this kind of stopped in 1962. So that's 31 years. So you may be looking at someone who was 50? About 50 years old by the time we get to the 60s, 1960s ones. So I'm thinking maybe they're in prison, because someone fell from the building in 1975, which would make that person 60 odd. If that makes sense. And that was Alison Lowell, who again fell from her death. And apparently she fell from the 12th floor. So these are all people who fell to their death or who were poisoned, like I mentioned. Now, it stops 1975. So if my theory is someone who committed the crimes, went to war, that's why they stopped, came back and they restarted in 1947, and now they've stopped at 1975. So my theory is they've committed the crimes, went to war, come back, continued, and then they passed away. That's why they've stopped. That is my theory. Please let me know what you think. So after 1975, there were further deaths attributed to potentially activity within the Cecil Hotel. There were other deaths around the Cecil. One in 1992, where a young African-American person fell from the building, or maybe fell from the building, they don't know, found them outside, and police believe they might have been pushed or fallen from the top of the building. It might have happened. Now then, the next big case to hit the Cecil was the one I mentioned of Elisa Lam. Now, this happened in 2013, and there's so much speculation about this case online that it's proper suspicious. Even me, who's just developed a serial killer, and I do believe that, by the way. I think I've got something with that. So if anyone else can help me out with this, or you online detectives, that would be amazing, because you guys are amazing at that kind of stuff. So the next death at Cecil that has brought a lot of controversy with that one of Elisa Lam, as I mentioned. She was traveling from Canada. She was a student. She wanted to go and get some some life experience. She went to travel and stay at this Cecil hotel. It wasn't called that at the time. It was called Stay on Main. They tried to rebrand it and make it look attractive, and had different entries. So the people who lived there, the residents, and the less I don't know the way to say it without being cruel. The people, the undesirable people they want to stay in there, were separated from the people who were booking places. Now, Elisa Lam went missing for 19 days. There's footage all over the internet. I'll try and put someone here where she's like frantically in the lift pressing buttons, like what's going on. It looks like, from what the people have said who have been like discussing this in forums and things, that maybe the tape's been slowed down and something's been edited out, like they've lost 34 seconds. 34 seconds in CCTV can be a lot, can hide a lot. So she's trying to get into this lift, doesn't work. She exits to one side, and then you see what looks like someone else's shoe poking out the bottom of the lift, or from the edge of the frame of the camera. She's never seen again. So 19 days later, they find her in one of the water tanks on the roof of the hotel. Now, in this water tank, we don't know how long she's been there, potentially the whole 90 days. She's naked, but her clothes are at the bottom. Now, I find that really peculiar, right? That she's climbed up to this water tank, because of these big ones, she's climbed up to it. What's she doing with the clothes? Like holding them? She's naked climbing up? Did she get naked in the water tank? How did she end up naked in there with the clothes at the bottom? To me, it feels like someone's chucked her in, chucked her clothes in afterwards. But anyway, it was only discovered because people who were staying at the hotel said the water's funky. So this water they were drinking, showering in, brushing their teeth with, was full of this poor young woman's body. And there's people who were staying there at the time who said, that they feel sick now, knowing that for 19 days they were bathing in somebody else's body. Isn't that disgusting? Someone's like decomposing remains. So yeah, obviously traumatic for all involved, especially Elisa's family. I think it's fishy as. I think there's something. I don't think she's killed herself. Looking at the size of that water tank, it doesn't look like it was easy to open. If she is in this confused state, how on earth has she climbed up to the roof, opened a water tank, got herself naked, jumped herself in and thrown her clothes in? It just doesn't make sense to me anyway, but that's just me. But there's lots of theories online about that. And then the final case we've got there is 2015, where they found a corpse of a man outside. They don't know who he is, and they don't know whether he came from the Cecil or not. So yeah, so that's the Hotel Cecil in a brief history. But like I said, the Night Stalker stayed there, and he just walked about in his pants covered in blood, and people didn't bat an eyelid at it, because in the 80s, when he was prolific, apparently that was normal. I don't know. So yeah, he'd go and do his killing sprees, take all his bloody clothes off outside and put them in the bin. Then he'd go in his knickers and just go to his room. And that was fine. Okay. Jack Unterweger as well, so an Australian serial killer. He spent some time in the Cecil, and his MO was killing ladies of the night, so sex workers. And yeah, he stayed there for a while too. So yeah, that is the history of the Hotel Cecil. I know it sounds mad, but I genuinely think there's a connection between those apparent suicides and accidental deaths, the push-ins and the poisons. Whether or not it's one person or two people, I don't know. We do know that poisons kind of aged out, don't we, after a while, and they weren't the weapon of choice anymore. And pushing people off a building is much less messy. However, let me know what you think, if I'm just having wild theories or not. But I think there's a connection there, especially the fact that they stop when America joined the war, start again when everyone comes back in 1947. It just seems too fishy to me. And then they stop around 1960 odd, when the person who may have been doing it might have passed away. So yeah, that's my theories. Let me know what you think. I appreciate it might sound a little bit like I watch too much television. Thank you for watching. In the meantime, stay safe, look after each other, and please don't commit any crimes.